Hey everyone, it's Alex Southey with a bonus Thursday. I heard about the Big in Canada podcast and I thought it was a fantastic idea. Music journalist Mac Cameron and Laura Stanley are the two behind it, and I just wanted to have them on, shed a little more light on what I think is a really good idea. And, my podcast is Canadian music too, so to speak. So they have really interesting insights on kind of the landscape, so to speak, as well as about the individual artists that they go into each episode. The one that I referenced a lot was the B44 episode, but frankly, there's already a bunch out that you should go listen to. So, with that in mind, I am Alex Southey, and this is a bonus episode of Your Worst Song.
Yeah,
I guess
please
I'll
do.
tell
Go
the
ahead.
story. So,
Sure.
I pitched this to CBC about this time last year, and I got to make a pilot of the show at CBC with a different host, but the show didn't get picked up.
Oh, that's interesting. So part of the pitch was with a different host, but it was still your baby, like your idea.
Yeah, which I think that's CBC, and we actually kind of talk about this a little bit in the show, just about how the Canadian media can work is that they love a known quantity.
Yeah. Quantity, if you're from Toronto, maybe that's how the
nice.
T's work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So the host of that was someone who had a bit more of a following than I do. I don't really have a following at all. So which made sense to me. I just wanted to get it made. So we did the pilot and it was good. It was great. I mean, it's not so different than what you're hearing now.
But it has that name.
Yeah, and I mean, more than that name, it's the CBC.
Yeah,
has infinite not infinite resources, but resources to make people hear it, and it gives it an air of legitimacy as well.
Yes.
So that would have been great, and I would have gotten paid to make it. Anyways, there are all sorts of positives that it would have been.
Yes.
However, so then they didn't pick it up, which it happens. It's pretty normal stuff. And I kind of sat on it for a bit, and then I decided I must get revenge and prove these people wrong. So then I contacted Laura, and then after various kind of stops and starts, I was like, Laura, we must rock.
You guys initially looked for ways to sabotage them in other ways, and then fell back on the. No, I'm kidding.
No sabotage. I just I just gotta be able to go see. Yeah, that's all I need to be able to do. Yeah.
Good. Well, okay, and I guess bring both of you into the conversation. You explained how the setting in which you became friends, I guess, but what specifically did you bond? Did one message the other and say, "Hey, great writing"? How does that begin?
I remember. I think we both love the weather station. That to me feels like a foundational.
I think I invited you on a bonus episode of 20 or 20 to talk about ignorance by the weather station.
Yeah. So I think it really stemmed from there.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. And then once, what are you both doing now? You both met at Dominionated, so I am kind of aware of what you're both doing, but do you want to share what you're doing in addition to the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I did Dominionated for a long time. I kind of slowed down because I had a kid 2 years ago. So that takes up a lot of my time.
Yes.
I actually don't really know why I'm doing this podcast, because I don't actually have time to make a sixth podcast.
Yeah.
And chase after a toddler, but
here you are.
That's me. I mean, Dominionated came to I feel a pretty natural end. I think my hope for this show is that it actually gets at some of the same things that Dominionated tried to get at, but obviously exploring music that's not present. We're looking back, obviously, and also we're pretty much looking at popular music, which again I don't really think Dominionated did, and I think that's part of why Dominionated had to cease to be, because music writing about music that's not popular is also not popular. so
That is a
and
brutal, true way of saying it.
yeah, it's just how it is. So my hope was that this would be fun, you know. I mean, that's really Laura would agree with me that our main goal of this is just for it to be fun. So yeah.
Yeah, I think our goals as this project, we were talking about it and it fluctuated. Like we had different grand ideas, but then we always come back to let's just have fun. Let's just have a good time. Fun and then revenge. You know, it's just
Yeah, fun with an undercurrent of revenge. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Fun is a really good North Star. That's obviously great to have that be the underlying thing that you're like kind of always trying to pursue or keep in mind. Um, what are your other goals for the podcast though? Like what I'm curious if obviously there are maybe probably metric stuff that there's more boring to get into potentially, but just like as an idea, because I thought Laura, you brought up something really interesting in the first episode, which you guys will deal with, I assume, probably in every episode, which is there is kind of like a pro Canada nationalistic slight vibe to this whole idea. Big in Canada, it's focused only on that. I don't mean in the icky nationalist way, but just there is a kind of inherent, like you guys both get into it, there's a weird inherent pride of like I'm glad this maybe objectively slightly worse band is being forced to on us by radio because they're Canadian, and that's good.
Laura, do you want to
I
take
think
this?
something that really shifted my perspective when thinking about this podcast is something that Mac said to me pretty early on, which is the focus is less on why these artists didn't make it big, like in the like outside of Canada, and why
Mhm.
they did make it big in Canada, which I know is like like a subtle shift, but I think it's a really important one. So I think for us, like I guess our goal is to really dive into, okay, well, what are the structures in place in Canada that are helping these artists succeed only in Canada, and at the same time, like limiting them to being only big in Canada. So more so looking internally and criticizing and just kind of questioning. I think we don't have all the answers in a lot of the episodes. We keep saying to ourselves like, you know, like what, like how did this happen, or like the industry failed them, or like yeah, asking ourselves like why is this bizarre nationalistic pride at play for so much of the music that we're talking about, but so much Canadian music in general. So I think those are some of our goals. Mac, do you have any other?
Yeah, I feel like we're trying to figure it out a little bit, because I don't know if, and it's like sounds silly, like are we gonna figure it out, like why Canadians love white reggae or whatever, but like maybe like I think like that's sort of like what we want to find out, like what is it that makes Canadians tick
Well, I think
when it
that's
comes to
why
music.
this isn't an icky nationalistic Canadian project. You are looking at it with a healthy dose of analysis and wondering why, in some ways, that like there are issues, but also interesting specifics. Like, and also, Laura, you said the shift isn't like the idea could have been why they didn't work in the US. But I like the fact that it shifted on this because then it leads you to talk about things like you did in the first episode, which is setting out what maple means, that agreement, and how that impacts the music that we get and stuff like that.
Well, something that I've found, like just telling friends and whatever about the show, is that like people don't really know
No,
what's CanCon and what's not unless like you're kind of plugged in.
I have found the exact same
You
thing.
know, like which to me is fascinating, because it, as we kind of set out at the beginning of every episode, we live in this like kind of alternate reality where these songs that you think are, you know, that Bedouin,
Massive.
let's like stick on that Bedouin Soundclash song, like you can go your whole life thinking like, oh, this song is
Huge.
huge song that
Yeah.
everybody knows, but then all of a sudden, like you're somewhere else, or you talk to somebody not from Canada and they're like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, this is not a real song.
And I
Or
think
not a song.
Mac talks about that really well in the first like kind of intro episode
Mm-hmm.
when he explains like what this show is and how he would be listening to the classic rock station and
Yeah.
then hear what is it, switching to glide or whatever
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
on like in between these huge like I don't know, Led Zeppelin or
Yeah.
whomever. And then you hear this band and you think that they're just in that mix, but then no, they're
No, that's
just like randomly playing on a street festival.
yeah,
Like,
no, that's extremely well said. I think the image of you, Mac, coming up to just seeing this band that in your mind, I guess, would have been alongside the biggest bands because that's who they're played alongside on the radio. No, I think that's a
Exactly.
perfectly well said. Like, I think people, whoever is listening to this right now and considering listening to that podcast, do not miss out on that first explainer episode because it does a really good job of
Of what we're
the
trying to do. I mean, like
context.
another good one for me in my mind, like alongside the Kings, is like when I was in middle school, I loved Our Lady Peace.
Yes,
Like, okay, so like
me
you
too.
get into Our Lady Peace and you're like, sick, this is great rock music, and
Yeah,
like
Rain
you,
Maida's up there with Eddie
sure,
Vedder and Kurt
sure, and then
Cobain.
and then you subscribe to Spin and Rolling Stone, and like they have their lists of like the 25 greatest albums you must own or whatever, and you're always like, where the fuck's Our Lady
Where's
Peace?
Naveed? Yeah, yeah.
And then it kind of dawns on you, you're like, oh, this is CanCon.
Absolutely. And I think something else that's really interesting about that is I think people in Canada, they understand that we have an inferiority complex being next to the US, but they don't think about how similar they are to like to me, this whole idea reminds me of when, you know, you stumble into some online subculture like, oh, why am I in like Brazil Twitter now? But they're celebrating an artist that's massive in Brazil, and then we've never heard of them. But to them, they are an Elvis equivalent. And the same thing happens in Canada. We just don't really think about it because we think, oh yeah, like Nelly Furtado gets into America. Like we know exactly who's actually famous. And it's just not the case. And
Yeah,
by actually famous, obviously, I'm using Hollywood and America, and I guess as the barometer.
relatively famous. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
relatively famous. Anyway, I'm just very happy that this podcast exists. It's a fantastic idea, and I'm so happy that that shift, like you had that shift point of that it's not about why they didn't make it elsewhere; it's why they did succeed here. There's a
Yeah.
lot of insights for not just for audiences, but for other musicians. I think who are actually participating in the system you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think part of why we're looking back is that the system doesn't exist in the same way that it did. Like the star making system
Yeah.
is diminished for sure due to streaming and whatever, like just listening habits. And
Yeah. It's almost in this mythic realm that's like we think it existed, you know.
it definitely did. I
No,
mean,
I know.
definitely. I mean, Alan
Yeah.
Doyle is famous, Jan Arden is Jan Arden is famous.
Yeah.
It worked for a long time, and like there was money there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that's important, but it kind of is
It
when
is.
you're trying to get people to hear your music and stuff. So I don't know. It's the other thing I just want to add that I don't know if has necessarily come across is that we do have a laugh about all we do like have some of the stuff is funny, like it's
Yes,
not
it's a
all
funny.
just an analysis and serious, like introspect or like
Mhm.
cultural analysis. There is lots of funny stuff here.
No, it's not like
I
meant to be like an NPR serious cultural
no.
thing. It's
No.
definitely loose. Like you guys laugh and have a good time. Good point making that
I
clear.
think
Sorry, go ahead.
we definitely try to make it accessible to like you don't have to be a music nerd to like tune in as well. Like I think a lot of these songs like you'll just know. Like I have friends of mine who aren't huge music nerds but have found the show to be accessible because we do talk about like well, in the episodes that we've done so far, we talk about like early 2000s, late 90s, just
Yeah.
like pop culture that was everywhere. So we talked about mod robes on the first episode and people were like, "Oh my god, mod robes." And we're very excited about it. So those sorts of things I hope are also just like that kind of a nostalgia quality to it, certainly. But I hope that those are more accessible. And I think like Mac and I balance each other out well there because Mac has a huge, large music knowledge that I only dabble in, and he'll name every single Our Lady Peace record. But then I'll be like, Mac, my emotions, you know? So it's
Yeah,
like it's a
right.
nice little balance, I think.
That sounds like a great balance. Is there anything else either of you guys want to say maybe before we wrap it up? I wanted to be this was meant to just be a bite-sized thing. I hope people at the end of this are going to go click onto your podcast. But is there
Yeah,
anything that we haven't talked about or I haven't brought up or anything like that?
I don't think so. I think you got it all. I'll start by saying thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
And yeah, if you're interested in the show, Big in Canada, at Big in Canada Pod, we're on all your podcast apps. Get it.
And maybe just one extra thing is like schedule. It's Tuesdays.
Every
is that right?
Tuesday,
Yeah, every Tuesday. So there's not going to be. It's not going to be. Some podcasts do seasons, right, where they do like 10 and then that's it. Or
Well, you know what? You never.
You never know.
Yeah.
you never know. Okay.
I'm going with every Tuesday for right now.
Cool. Every Tuesday.
Till God strikes me down.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got that on record now.
Yeah.
I'm still in the back of my head thinking about the fact that it's a white guy singing at Bedouin Sound Clash. I had no idea that. I thought he was the one who played guitar, and then all right. Well, anyway, I've got some research to do.
Yeah. I mean, he sings and plays guitar. Anyways.
All right. Anyway, that's people.
They aren't the only ones.
Oh God, they're not the only
loves
ones.
white reggae.
Yes, absolutely. That's we could do a whole other podcast on that.
CanCon subgenres. We're trying to map it all out.
Yeah.
Hockey
Shoppers
rock,
Drug Mart, core.
hockey rock, white reggae.
All right, cool guys. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.